Hey guys, today I'm going to be taking some of the art that you guys have made and asked me to redraw, and I'm going to be, you know, redrawing it. Starting with this awesome drawing by Josh OX. I picked most of these at random, but I really wanted to draw a male body type, so I might have snuck this one in there. When redrawing this illustration, I decided to change up the pose, mostly because when I was looking at this drawing, there were certain things, obviously, that stuck out to me. One of the things I noticed right off the bat was this character has some pretty predominant facial features, and I really wanted to explore that myself. And doing that meant zooming in on the character and kind of cutting off the legs, so it's a much more cropped illustration. It didn't end up being full body, but I think it was all for the best because I really had a lot of fun drawing this character's face. And then there's two other pretty predominant things that I definitely wanted to carry over. The big dark black circle engulfing the character, and then of course I think that's an iced coffee, so I wanted to make sure I incorporated that as well. Oh, and here I am trying to figure out what a hand looks like when it's holding an iced coffee. Here I'm actually just like looking at my own hand and trying to recreate it, but then later I actually hold something cylindrical and I realized that I was drawing that hand kind of wrong, so it's always important to use references. Especially with hands. Then I had pretty much the entire drawing done, so I just did like a final pass of going over like the entire character, darkening up the bits that I really liked and making sure that there was enough detail there to add color without making any huge mistakes. And then I started going in with the line art, and the first thing I did for the line art was that big black circle that I really wanted to do. So I actually used an Ohu brush marker, and I used the chisel tip first, and I outlined the whole circle to make sure, you know, it was a circle. Then I actually switched to the brush tip on the other side of the marker and used this to outline the character because it gives me a little bit more flexibility to get into tiny nooks and crannies, whereas coloring in the outside of the circle, I wanted it to be kind of exact, so by using the chisel nip, it doesn't vary in width at any time, so it works really well for that. Then I just went in and colored in the entire circle. And then I finished up the rest of the line art using a regular fine liner. This one's in the color black, so I was very careful about where I used it because I wanted the line art around the skin to be a lot softer, so I left that till later so I could use like a dark red or brown for that part of the liner. Oh, and this is just me showing off this hand because I was really proud of it. See what happens when you use a reference? And then I started coloring in the character. I ended up choosing colors that were a lot more saturated than the reference image, so I kind of like have to do some like backtracking later on in the drawing. And here you can kind of see me trying to darken up the hair without it blending in with like that dark black circle. So I'm kind of glad that I did that black circle pretty early. Otherwise, I think I would have just colored in the hair completely dark, and then when I went in to add the black circle, we would have run into some problems. Then I found a really good imitation for the blue, so I used that to color in the stripes. I think a lot of my markers are getting very, very low on the ink department, so it takes a few layers for me to get an even tone. And then here for funsies, I decided to add a white border around the character to just make the hair pop a little bit more. Like, it obviously could be worse, but I feel like this really helped make the hair look separate from the background. Then I switched to this like dark maroon Ohu fine liner, and I used this to add all of the line art around the face. This is something I've been doing a lot lately. Sometimes I do it after adding the color, but here I was kind of nervous about losing some of those facial features, so I decided to do it before. These fine liners work pretty well and hold up well next to Copics. And that's what the line art looked like after I'd finished it. And then it came down to trying to find the right skin tone. I tried blending a couple markers, but none of them were quite right. I ended up using E11 and R83. So E11 I used to color in all of the skin, obviously. And then I used the R83 for anything that I wanted to be a little bit redder, like around the eyes, maybe the cheeks, the nose, and the ears, and then any elbows or fingertips that I felt needed to have a little bit more reddish hue to them. Shading faces with like a little bit of blush is definitely my favorite thing to do with alcohol-based markers. I think it just works really, really well and lends well to the way I like to color faces. You can kind of see the process of how I'm doing that. I like it darker around the center of the face, and then it kind of gets lighter near the top and the bottom. Then I just had to color in the arms as well. Then I was pretty close to being done, and I realized I didn't finish the drink in their hand, so I finished up like the ice cubes, and I also just darkened the drink overall. Originally I had it so you could kind of see the hand through the drink, but they made it look just so watery and kind of gross if that's supposed to be coffee. So darkening it up kind of like thickened it up and made it look less transparent, and I think it looks a little bit more appetizing now. Oh, I forgot I added bubbles, so now it kind of looks like Pepsi or Coke or something. I'm new to this, drawing liquids. So here is XO Josh OX's drawing, and then here is my recreation. Thanks so much, Josh, for letting me recreate your character. It was a lot of fun, and it was really helping me practice my male anatomy. So thank you so much for asking me to redraw it. Next up, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. This is a drawing by Ruki.kruki.art. Anyway, I fell in love with the patterns and the colors of this drawing, so I was really excited when it popped up. And that's what I'm going to be recreating. Starting off again with a Prismacolor Colorase colored pencil in the color Rose. I started sketching out the character. I still don't want to like recreate the drawing exactly. I wanted to like switch it up a little bit, like kind of just draw it the way I would if I had sat down to draw this without the reference image. I am keeping this one a lot more similar than maybe the last drawing we just did, but I'm also just trying to make it my own as well. So what I kept was the hand in the pocket, and obviously the entire character looks like the same character, hopefully. Something I didn't realize when I first saw the drawing, and realized once I started trying to recreate it, was that the original drawing has like sort of a drop crotch in the overalls, and I had a hard time trying to recreate that. I was like, well, how do I make it look like the pants are ending there, but like obviously the body isn't ending there? So I had kind of some proportion issues where it just looked like the torso was really long, which obviously if you're wearing clothes that are hanging that low, they're going to make and elongate your torso. But like when someone's wearing it, you usually can tell like, oh, that's not where their actual waist is. So trying to recreate that in drawing form and really try to say that this is a drop crotch, that's such a weird thing to say, but like it was definitely a fun challenge trying to figure it out. And I might not have gotten it exactly, but I definitely made some improvement from my first attempt. Something I changed was for the background, I made the shapes vary in sizes more, so I took 3 of them and just made them huge and kind of like filled in the background of the character, and then used little ones surrounding her, just like the reference image. And then even though I was pretty close to being done, something wasn't gelling right about the pose, so I ended up moving that left leg under her a little bit more, because I looked at the reference image and it kind of looks like the character's floating a little bit, so I wanted to use that to my advantage. And by pulling this one leg under a little bit, I feel like it made it a little softer, her like floatiness, whereas when the legs were farther apart, it had a bit more of a stiff, like unorganic pose to it. The next step was line art, so I took that same dark brown, maroon, red color for the fine liner, and I used that to outline all of the skin, and then I used a dark purple to do all the rest of the line art, so like the clothes and the hair and the shoes and everything like that. Then for coloring, I used this very pale pink to color in the overalls. I thought this looked very, very similar to the reference image, so I was really happy that I had this marker. Then I used this slightly desaturated blue for all of the blue sections and added in shapes. I wasn't super exact with my shapes. I was kind of just trying to throw them in there and make sure that they, like, no 2 triangles were next to each other, no 2 circles were next to each other, you know, varying the pattern, that I kind of forgot that I'm, you know, drawing shapes. So some of them ended up looking like blobs. And this is a little bit different from the reference image. The reference image looks like they kind of used like a red or a hot pink for the other shape, but I decided to just use like a darker version of the overall, kind of like just keeping the color scheme more intact. I thought it looked more cohesive, but I don't know. It was a choice I made, and that's what it looked like. I did end up going over all those pink shapes with something a little bit more saturated just to make them pop a little bit more, and I definitely think that like pulled it more in the younger direction, which I think this drawing is supposed to be a younger character, so that helped a lot. Then I switched over to my Ohu brush markers. Potato brown. I like to use it whenever I can, and it looked pretty close to the reference image, so I used this for the skin. It's a little bit more saturated, I would say, but you know, it's pretty, so I'll take it. I didn't do as much shading in the face as I did with the last drawing, mostly because it is just so small, but I did add those purple lips that I love. Oh, and then for the hair, instead of making it straight black, I decided to kind of incorporate some purple into it because the color scheme is a little bit pastel for the most part, and I thought incorporating purple, kind of like the pinks of her outfit, would look good. I don't know if that's how color theory works, but I still like it. And then instead of layering it with just a black marker, I used a neutral gray, a very dark one, and I filled in the top section of her hair with that and then layered that over top of the purple sections as well, and it just made it look black. I'm using air quotations. But it also still kind of like fits into the color scheme, which I think is really pretty. And then since that was so dark and saturated up at the top, I decided to incorporate some more of that neutral gray down at the socks just to kind of like balance out the color scheme. Oh, as well as the watch. Then I used a pink marker to add some shading, kind of just underneath like the arms and especially that right foot because I wanted it to look like it was going further into the distance. And then I started coloring in the large shapes in the background. Here it's pretty obvious that this marker's running low. It's not frustrating at all. I love this color. It's like a perfect corally, desaturated pink. Instead of following the exact colors that the original artist used, I made sure I stayed within my color scheme for the background shapes. And then I also took my white gel pen and added a little bit of a border around it. That's just like a personal little touch. Here is the wonderful original illustration by ruki.kruki.art, and here is my recreation. It was kind of fun creating a crazy pattern and trying to keep it into a cohesive color scheme. Something I definitely need to continue practicing in the future. Next up, Jelly Splish created this illustration, and honestly, I'm just too excited. I really want to start drawing it, so yeah, let's move on. So I might have been a little too excited. I did create a bunch of thumbnails in my sketchbook to kind of come up with how I wanted to tackle this illustration in particular, and yes, I did ignore them all when I finally got out my piece of paper. So naturally, I didn't really care for where this sketch was going after about 10 minutes. It was very stiff, the characters weren't very believable, and I just wanted to give it another go. So I did. I flipped over the page and started drawing on the other side. This time purposely avoiding all the things I didn't like about the last drawing. And I thought it'd be fun to, again, tackle this the way I would draw it if I had come up with the idea. I'm not creative enough to have come up with the idea, but if I had, how would I draw it? And I thought, obviously they'd be so fun and be best friends. I mean, obviously it says me and my friends, but I decided to draw them more as like me and my best friends. So they're like hugging, and they're all just happy to be around each other. And drawing the little faces on the little like ghosty jelly bean things, oh, it was so much fun drawing these like goofy faces. And it was very loose and soft with the pose, making sure even though she's like holding on to two of these ghosty jelly bean things, I really don't know what they are, but they're awesome. I made sure all the lines were very soft and swooshy, and this just makes her look softer and swooshier and not so stiff like my original attempt. Now these faces that I've drawn on the ghosts aren't really my style. They're definitely Jelly Splish's style more than mine, but I did want to kind of create them the way they had drawn them. But I also decided to create one look a little bit more the way I would draw it. So I made one a blub ghost. You can see him up in the top right there. Cross eyes and a tongue sticking out. Classic. Then for line art, things had been going so well for the last two drawings, I decided to use that exact same dark, I don't even know what color it is. It's just like a dark red. And I used that to add all the line art to the face and around the skin. And then I used the black line art to add the line art to all of the black elements, you know, like her outfit. I do have a pretty particular way of drawing like the tops of heads and like the way hair parts, but I decided to make it perfectly round for this character to kind of imitate the way the little jelly beans in the background look, so that they kind of have a little bit of similarities between them two without, obviously, she's being much more complicated and detailed compared to them, but I thought it kind of just made them look more like family. I didn't add any line art to the jelly beans because I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to do that yet. So I moved on to coloring in the hair, and I used, I think, neutral gray 6 for this because I thought black would be a little too harsh. I wanted to kind of keep it a little bit lighter. And then for her shirt, since it kind of overlaps some of her hair, I also mixed it with purple, kind of like we did with the last character's hair. And I think it definitely separates it from the hair and makes it look a little bit more like kind of a shiny fabric. And then I colored in the pants with just the same color I used for the hair since they don't intersect in any way. It worked just fine. And I also used a little bit of a texture, the way I layered it to make it look kind of like the pants were fading. Then I took the lightest skin tone I could find and colored her in that way. Although it's not quite as light as the reference image, it's the closest I could do, and it's alright. Completely forgetting to color in her one arm, I moved on to adding line art to all of the jelly beans' faces, trying to imitate Jelly Splish's style. Oh, they're just so adorable. And then there's the blub ghost. He's adorable too. After finally coloring in that missing arm, I kind of tried to erase some of the pencil, but I was still very unsure of how I was about to color this, so I really didn't erase much. And then I started using some purples and trying to blend them out and trying to color in this ghost. And as soon as I started doing this, I looked back at the reference and I realized, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure Jelly Splish used a watercolor for this. My bad. If I had realized that earlier, I definitely would have done that as well, but this paper, it's a no-no for watercolor. So I had to do my best blending out the little ghosts with my Copic markers, which sometimes it worked really well, and other times it just some reason didn't want to blend, which I've never really had problems blending two colors together, but this dark purple just didn't want to blend. I don't know what I was doing wrong, but it was not happy with me. Did that stop me? No. I did try to avoid it for the most part though, like the really dark purple, because the other ones were blending just fine. I did make the one ghosty in the background a little bit darker, kind of like make him look like he's further back. And then I also purposely made the little ghost that she's hugging a little bit lighter to kind of make this one stand out from like the ghosts surrounding it. I sat down and started coloring these ghosts, and I was like, oh, well, I don't have to be anywhere for an hour. I'll have enough time to probably color this in, right? No. I had to take a break and come back. These things took a while, but I think the effect was worth it. I also think you can definitely tell that the ones I did later on, so like the last couple ones I did, definitely turned out a lot better than like the first couple ones that I did. And I was definitely like learning from the experience. Then I actually took that pretty dark purple that was having a hard time blending, and I used this to just add a little bit of shading around the sections where a lot of the ghosties were intersecting to kind of like separate the shapes, and also add their little tails lower in the illustration because I realized there was a lot of white space down there, and if there are all these little ghosties surrounding her, they'd probably have the tails falling behind her, so I just added some simple shapes back there to kind of just hint at that idea. Then I used a ruler to add the border around the character and then wrote out the words at the bottom. Here's the original drawing by Jelly Splish, and here is my recreation. This one was a lot of fun, and I don't think I got quite the right color for the little ghosties, and the little guy in the back's a little dark and he kind of stands out, but he's adorable, so that's fine. Definitely drawing something that I've never drawn before, which is always a blast, so, and trial and error. But I do want to thank Jelly Splish for sharing this art and allowing me to recreate it. I want to thank everyone who added art to the tag on Instagram, hashtag drawthiswiffwaffles. I do pick these at random, aside from, you know, the one I mentioned earlier. So I want to thank you all for just including such fun art to recreate in the tag. If you'd like the chance of me recreating one of your illustrations in the future, you can use the hashtag drawthiswiffwaffles on Instagram, Twitter, I don't know, anywhere you can use a hashtag. And then you can also send me an email if you don't have any of those social medias. I also want to thank everyone for watching, and I hope you all have a delicious evening full of waffles.